どうもこんにちは。マネックス証券の岡本です。皆さん、今年はグロース株が大きく下落して元気がなくなっている投資家の皆さん多いんではないかと思います。そんな状況なんですが、今年は10年で5倍以上になると思われる銘柄に長期投資をしているイギリスのベイリー・ギフォードのティム・ギャラットさんにインタビューをしました。ベイリー・ギフォードはテスラの筆頭株主のうちの一社で、イーロン・マスクとも定期的にミーティングを行っている運用会社です。ということで、今回の動画ではベイリー・ギフォードの投資哲学と投資判断のプロセス、それからテスラを保有する理由、そして他の保有銘柄についてお伺いしています。そして最後に、成功する投資家とは一体どういう投資家なのかなどお話をしていただいています。ということで、このインタビューどうぞご覧ください。では今月のインタビューですけども、こちらはですね、イギリスはエジンバラにありますベイリー・ギフォードといいます老舗の運用会社です。で、非常に特徴のある運用を行っておりまして、イギリスであれば誰でも知っている、投資の世界であれば誰でも知っているような会社なんですけれども、今回はですね、そのベイリー・ギフォードのクライアントダイレクターのティム・ギャラットさんにお話をお伺いしました。ティムさんにお伺いしたことはこちらでありましてですね、前半でございます。彼らの投資哲学、それから投資判断のプロセスで、長期投資っていうふうに謳っている運用会社非常に多いと思うんですけれども、このベイリー・ギフォードの長期投資に対する考え方は非常に面白いです。で、ぜひ聞いていただきたいんですけども、あとテスラを保有する理由というのがありますけど、実はベイリー・ギフォードはですね、テスラの上位株主の一社でありまして、テスラを長期保有しています。で、これからも長期的に持つという話なんですけれども、彼らそういう長期投資家ということもありましてですね、定期的にイーロン・マスクとのミーティングなんかも行っているんだそうです。あと、彼ら現在の上位保有銘柄についてもお伺いしておりますということで、インタビュー前半をご覧ください。Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for doing this call with us this morning, your time.
I'm delighted to join you. Thank you for having me.
Can you please explain your investment philosophy and your investment decision-making process? In that, you have the 10 checkpoints when you make investment decision. Can you please highlight some of the most critical points of the list with some examples?
Yeah, sure. Our philosophy, I suppose, is based on three underlying very strong beliefs. The first is that stock market returns are not smoothly distributed. There is a lot of evidence over many, many decades that stock market returns are driven by a very small number of outliers. So a tiny number of companies account for almost all of the stock market returns. In fact, less than 5% of companies. So the whole focus needs to be on finding this really small number of outliers. And what we tend to find is the special companies that dominate returns, the special companies that go up 10, 20, 30, 50, or even 100 times, have a number of common characteristics. Often these companies are at the intersection of very dramatic technological and societal change. Often they are run or managed by very, very long-term management teams, and often founders who have a lot of their own personal wealth tied up in the business, a lot of skin in the game. And they also allocate capital very differently to most companies out there. They invest for the long term. So that's the first belief, this big skew of equity markets. The second belief is that we can only actually identify and find and back these outliers if we think very, very long term. I think thinking over periods of many, many years or decades, instead of the real short-termism in the stock market. So getting away from this quarterly earnings cycle and stepping back and saying, what's the world going to look like in 2030? That means that we can identify a very different size of opportunity. We're thinking ahead to 2030. You start thinking, gosh, maybe it's going to cost less than $10 to sequence the genome of a human being. What does that mean? Maybe solar is going to be 10 or 100 times cheaper than fossil fuels. What are the implications of that? Maybe computing power is 100 times greater by extrapolating Moore's law. What does that mean for the whole approach to the way we deploy autonomy in driving, the way we manufacture food? So it allows you to think conceptually about very different opportunity sets, and also thinking long term allows you to build a really different kind of relationship with the company management team. And because you can end up having a discussion with them about their 10-year vision, not whether they're going to hit or miss next quarter's earnings. So that's the second point, thinking long term. And the third point is about basically rewiring ourselves cognitively. People in our industry talk about having an information advantage, and often that well, by that they mean they're close to the action, they're close to the financial centers of Tokyo or London or Frankfurt or New York. But for us, actually, the information advantage lies in being as far away from the noise as possible, and tapping into completely different perspectives from outside our industry, academics, scientists. And that's because we think investing in the way that I've described, it needs different thinking skills. The imagination and the creative thinking is actually just as important as the analysis and the spreadsheet modeling. And you can teach someone to model DCFs in a spreadsheet, discounted cash flows, but you cannot teach imagination. So that creative thinking is a really important part of the philosophy. So the three core beliefs are, find the outliers, think long term, and think differently. And from a process point of view, we distill that into a research framework, which involves 10 questions that we ask of any company, whether it's an existing holding in the portfolio or whether it's a potential, candidate for the portfolio. And the questions really link back to that philosophy. So, we're looking at what could this company be like in 10 years' time? How big is the opportunity? One of the questions focuses very heavily, and I think it's that all of the questions are important, but I would say one of the most important ones relates to company culture and adaptability. We place a huge amount of emphasis on corporate culture. And that's interesting because you can't model culture, you can't put it into a spreadsheet, it doesn't always show up as a number. But what we're looking for is long-term vision. We believe that the most successful investments in the world will be companies that are motivated by a desire to solve a big problem in the world, a big societal issue or technological challenge that needs to be addressed. And if you can back a management team that has a single focus on solving that problem, then they will probably end up being profitable, but as a second order consequence. So the companies that try to make profits as their primary objective are really the most successful ones. The most successful companies are driven by a mission, and then profits follow. And so what we're looking for is that relentless vision, that relentless adaptability. And I think it's a real opportunity because whether it's Amazon in 2005 or Facebook back in 2012, those kinds of adaptable cultures can drive long returns. And then today you're looking at companies with similar kinds of cultures like Nvidia or Moderna, relentlessly adaptable, driven founders. So that cultural point is really important. And the access that we enjoy to companies because of our long-term approach means that we can ascertain cultural edge, I think, more effectively than the market. So we place a big emphasis on that question. And then the one of the questions in our framework is, how could this company be 5 times its current size over the next decade? We're looking for companies that can quintuple at least. And I think it's an interesting question because when we think about valuation, we're not thinking about a short-term spot multiple. We're thinking about proper upside. So it's thinking about probability adjusted payoffs. And if we can come up with a scenario where a company could be 5 or 10 times larger and attach a reasonable probability to that, and I don't mean a 51% probability, I mean maybe a 20% probability, then the payoffs there are really interesting. So yeah, that long-termism, that focus on culture and that focus on extreme upside is baked into the process.
one of your largest holding is Tesla. Can you please explain why you are a long-term investor of the company, and what is the expected holding period for the company?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Tesla is a stock that we've held as a firm for a decade. When we first looked at that company, the market cap was about $4 billion. And what appeals to us is the culture of really going back to first principles, and the relentless sort of long-term vision and adaptability of it. And it's really interesting to us that there's an example of a company that is disrupting a very traditional industry with no previous domain knowledge by going back and reinventing the whole supply chain, actually, from not only the fact that the cars are electrified, but also the whole manufacturing process and simplifying that. So our contention with Tesla is, when we first bought the stock, they'd made about 7,000 cars, and the question we were asking is, could they one day make 500,000? Now they're doing around about 1 million units a year. So could they make 10 million like VW? And it's we think that's perfectly plausible. They currently have, if they optimize their current manufacturing capacity, they can make about 4.5 million cars, but they have plenty of cash, enough to bring several million vehicles of extra capacity online. So if you think about 10 million cars a year with a selling price of $40,000 to $50,000, crucially, we think one big difference is that they can enjoy software-like operating margins. So why shouldn't they enjoy 25-30% margins like a company like Apple? And if you run the numbers on that, you end up with some quite interesting profit streams. Quite easily get to over $100 billion of profit just on the car business. And then, of course, we think that the benefits of their vertical integration are hugely underestimated. At its heart, this is a data-led company. They're making their own chips, which makes them very, very different to traditional car companies. And then, yes, it's taken longer than they thought, but it's coming on a 10 or 20 year view, the notion of robo taxis and autonomy. And, then you can run some quite interesting numbers around, what if they, could supply autonomous software licenses to, 10-20% of the global vehicle fleet. Maybe they can charge $100-$150 a month on that. You end up with some quite interesting numbers coming out of that. And that's how we think about the probability adjusted payoffs. And I think the stock market, the big inefficiency here is that the stock market will look one quarter ahead. It will obsess over whether Tesla is going to hit or miss its production targets. It will obsess over an optically high short-term multiple of earnings. But actually, the reality is, as we look 10 years ahead, we're at the start of a multi-generation replacement cycle here. There are 1.5 billion internal combustion vehicles in the world to replace. And Tesla is right at the heart of that, and it has an enormous data advantage. And that's before you think about the enormous opportunity in the utility markets that they could apply their software to as well.
So it sounds like you're going to be a real long-term investor from now on too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have recycled some money out of Tesla over the last couple of years into a new generation of holdings, because clearly, from time to time there have been some sort of technically driven spikes in the share price. So we can take advantage of those. But yeah, we are very excited about the long-term opportunity for Tesla, but also a number of other outlier stocks like that.
You just mentioned Tesla, but can you please highlight some of the other top holdings of Baillie Giffords?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are excited about these very long-term secular shifts. If you look at areas, if you look at software and the extent to which the digitalization of our economy will continue, that takes us towards some really interesting. If you look at what's driving that, it takes you back to companies like ASML. That's a Dutch company which produces lithography equipment. It's arguably the most important company in the world, actually, because they are, without them, then the likes of Samsung, TSMC, and Intel would not be able to make any chips. So all roads lead back to ASML. If that company was listed on the West Coast rather than in Europe, it would probably be worth 5 times more than it is. So it's a really exciting company, a very, very smart management team and scientists who are relentlessly shrinking chip sizes. Then you have companies like NVIDIA. And I think the exciting thing about NVIDIA is, clearly their graphics processing chips predominantly are used in mobile phones at the moment, and used in data center optimization. But actually the adaptability of that culture and their ability to deploy their expertise in optimizing, drug development, climate change simulation, autonomous driving, we think that software could underpin so many parts of our economy on a 10-year view, and the market does not understand that. Then in healthcare, the companies like Moderna and BioNTech are really underpinning the revolution in genomics, and I think that could totally disrupt the traditional pharmaceutical industry in terms of the way drugs are developed and also manufactured. These again, software is the heart of these companies, and I think their ability to scale very quickly into new areas and to switch their technology from one drug type to the next is massively underestimated. So the opportunity for companies like BioNTech and Moderna is the market just thinks they're COVID plays, but actually they've got this enormous platform of treatments that they can pivot to very, very quickly. And in 10 years, we see no reason why they could not be addressing other conditions like, cancer, malaria, all sorts of other respiratory diseases. So enormously exciting. Then you have companies like Spotify, two-sided network, huge scale advantages, using data again to transform the music industry, but also increasingly the book industry. We have scenarios where they can very easily be generating $20 billion of revenue, and that's about their market cap today. So enormously exciting.
はい、ちょっとですね、ティムさんのお話をおさらいしたいと思うんですけれども、ベイリー・ギフォードの投資哲学信念ということなんですが、マーケットを牽引しているのは大きなマーケットの中でマーケットを引っ張っていっている株価指数を引き上げているっていうのはあくまでも一握りの会社だということなので、何倍も上がりそうな、よく10バガーという10倍になる銘柄という言い方をしてますけれども、彼らは10年間で5倍になると、そういう銘柄を探すということです。これ言うのは簡単なんですが、それをやるにあたってですね、言ってるのが超長期的に考えるということで、長期的って普通我々は使いますけど、スーパーロングターム、超長期的な視点で考える。ですから来年とか再来年じゃなくて10年先ですね。私も時々言ってますけど、10年先、2032年とかですね、そういう世界を考えて想像して、でその時、そういう時代が来た時にどういう銘柄、どういう会社が恩恵を受けているだろうなっていうことをですね、真剣に考えて、会社を選ぶということなわけです。でこれ一見難しそうに聞こえますけど、でも皆さんよくね、いっぺん時間かけてねやっていただきたいんですよ。そうするとね、やっぱりご自分の専門とかある方もいらっしゃると思うんですね。テクノロジーの会社勤めてらっしゃるとか、もしくは自分に関係するところでこれってこうなってるだろうなっていうのは人それぞれいろんな思いがあると思うんですけども、そういうふうに考えていって、そうするとどういった会社が恩恵を受けるのかなってなんとなく分かってくるんじゃないかと思うんですが、分からなくてもそういうエクササイズをするっていうのはとても大切だと思うんですよね。であとノイズから遠いところが彼らの優位性だというふうに言ってましたけども、これ私もアメリカの証券会社でですね、一時本社のトレーディングフロアで働いたことがあるんですけども、そういう環境にいると普通だとなんかいっぱい情報があっていいでしょうと思われがちなんですけれども、ありすぎるんですよ。でありすぎる情報の中で不必要な情報もいっぱい入ってくるんですよね。でそういうのを彼はノイズっていうふうに言ってるわけです。でロケーション的にもエジンバラっていうのはニューヨークですとか、イギリスですからロンドン近いわけですけど、ただ距離的に離れてますよねと。でそういった意味でそういう環境で 考えることができる、投資について考えることができるっていうアドバンテージがあると。そうするとその結果として違う発想が出てくるんじゃないかっていうようなことを言ってるわけですね。で、実は私もベリー・ギフォードのこの会社、2回ほど訪問したことがあるんですけれども、エジンバラっていう町、行かれたことお分かりだと思うんですが、非常にのんびりというかいい町なんですよ。で、確かにそういうところで投資を考えた方がもう忙しいニューヨークで考えるよりもですね、いいアイデアが浮かびそうだと。で、私も東京で考え事をするよりもですね、故郷の宮崎の海を見つめながら考えた方がいいアイデアが浮かぶということを実際経験してますし、多分皆さんこれ聞いてそうだよねと思う方とても多いんだと思うんです。で、あとアークインベストのキャッシュウッドさん、彼らもニューヨークにオフィスありましたけども、フロリダに引っ越しをしてます。いろんな理由があるのかもしれませんが、やはりこの前前回ですね、ジェナスのファンドマネージャーの方、インタビューさせていただきましたけれども、彼らもオフィスは、デンバーなんですよ。コロラド州のデンバーということで、いわゆる金融の街にないんですよね。ということなので、そういうことが大切だということを言ってます。で、1ヶ月で彼らは 10% 上がる銘柄ではなくて、10年間で5倍上がるような銘柄を探しているということですね。で、あともう一遍後で触れますけど、人と違うことを考えるコンセンサスと同じように考えない方がいいですよということであります。で、ティムさん、テスラの魅力をですね語っておりましたけれども、でその後株価が上がったら売って他の銘柄を買うというような話をされてたかと思うんですが、これは何でかというと、運用会社っていうのは、大抵の会社あると思うんですけど、10% ルールっていうのがありまして、要はポートフォリオの中で1銘柄のウェイトが 10% を超えてくるとちょっと多いんじゃないのと、バランス的にということで売らなきゃいけないっていうルールがあるんですよね。それがあるゆえに売却を余儀されることがあるというような話でありました。ということで、ティムさんのインタビュー後半を続きを見ていただきたいと思います。
Can you please share your thought on the long-term opportunity in the U.S. stock market?
Yeah. Well, firstly, we place limited emphasis on sort of overall market valuations because of the dynamic that I described earlier. Stock market returns are so skewed that actually aggregate stock market valuations often don't tell us all that much. But I guess what I would say is that we don't have any expertise at all in forecasting the direction of inflation. We don't know whether inflationary pressures at the moment are going to be transient or long term. But what we would say is that even if they're long term, what excites us is that we are not having to rely on high exit multiples in order to generate a strong 5x scenario for our stocks. So when we think about what could this company look like, what kind of revenue stream could it earn, an earning stream on a 10-year view, if we put that scenario on 5x earnings, there is still ample scope for upside. So I think the US stock market has clearly been a big beneficiary of very cheap capital for the long term. Those days are probably over. But I think as stock pickers we feel excited because the last 10 years have been an environment where prior to the pandemic, a pretty average company could be made to look quite special just because it was able to, use very cheap capital to buy its stock back and make its earnings per share look pretty. But actually those days are over. So in an environment where, the cost of capital goes up, and companies have to navigate, various supply chain pressures in the world, that concept of adaptability that I was talking about becomes more and more important. So I think the long-term view would be there's going to be an increased bifurcation between the big winners and the big losers, because the most adaptable companies are really going to benefit. And I would also say that there are a lot of companies in the US stock market and in the global market that are considered to be safe havens. The big pharmaceutical companies, the big energy companies, the big utility companies, the big finance companies, but over the next 10 years, they are in very, very deep danger because they're run by complacent management teams who have not innovated, They've been run like Kodak. They've not been prepared to cannibalize their own business models. And, we think that it's only a matter of time before that bites them. So there's going to be a big shakeout, we would argue, between the disruptors and the disrupted.
What would you say are the good example of disrupted companies?
I think the traditional energy companies would be a good example. Yes, I know they're enjoying a short boost at the moment because oil prices have gone up, but actually, on a 10-year view, how many of them are really genuinely disrupting their own business models? Yes, some of them are sort of saying nice things about investing in a few wind farms, but they're not really genuinely going back to square one and cannibalizing their own business models. And the big threat for them is properly priced carbon. If you look at a company like Exxon or someone like that, they will look optically cheap, but when you push $50 per ton carbon through their P&L, suddenly their profits evaporate very, very quickly. And I think what we need to be thinking about for any company in the world over the next 10 or 20 years, lots of the externalities are going to have to start to be absorbed into the company's financial profits. And for many, many decades, companies have been able to get away without that happening. So the world's changing, and companies that are not sort of on the front foot are going to be those that are very, very heavily disrupted. So, there's one example. I think the finance companies as well, we are very interested in the opportunity for companies like Adyen to transform the global payments market by basically taking a lot of cost out of the system and enjoying economies of scale. And, a lot of the companies in the financial system have been enjoying very, very elevated profits for a very long time. And again, I would say that they are very, very ripe for disruption over the next decade.
We have seen a rotation out of so-called growth stock into value stocks, and growth investors naturally suffered very much. In your opinion, as a long-term investor, what is your advice for growth stock investors during such a difficult period for growth stocks?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I would say there are a few things. The first thing is get away from the noise. I think it's so easy in an environment like this to get sucked into the Bloomberg, the flashing tickers and things, and it's really important to find time to think. Go for a long walk without your phone and just try to calibrate the world. Make sure you continue to speak to different people outside the financial circles to really calibrate whether anything's changed. And I think that in turn means that often in an environment like this, there's a real temptation to do something. Don't just sit there, do something. But actually, the best advice might be don't just do something, sit there. And actually very, very hard to do that. But in 2008, for example, of course, it was a very different, economic backdrop, different challenges at that time. But one of our portfolios fell by about 55%. We basically did nothing. And that was one of the best investment decisions we've ever made is to do nothing. Because then, of course, all those stocks came back and, 12 months later, they were above the starting point. But behaviorally, that's very, very challenging. So I think it's about resisting the temptation to act straight away, and really the process element that I described earlier, those 10 questions are a really important anchor, because you've got to go back and just say, has anything changed here? And of course, some things have changed. The cost of capital has gone up, and that's probably not going to change. Deglobalization is probably here to stay. So we need to go back and revisit those theses. Does it matter that Tesla is selling 25% of its cars in China? Does it matter, for the Alibaba investment case, that it's no longer likely to go into Southeast Asia? It will be confined to China. If we held Apple, which we don't, we would be very worried about the fact they do all of their manufacturing in Shenzhen. So there are fundamentals that change, but you need to take time to go back and calibrate these probabilities, and often it will take months. I think the other thing is resist the temptation to become an expert at out predicting everyone else on the issue of the day. You know, we are never, during the pandemic, suddenly the whole finance community tried to become expert epidemiologists, and now everybody's trying to become an expert criminologist. We shouldn't try to outguess everyone else on these short-term issues. We should surround ourselves with people who are experts and listen to them and use their perspectives. And then I think the final thing would be so hold discipline is really crucial. You should ask investors about their hold discipline, not just their sell discipline. But also get out and see companies. You know, at periods like this are the times where we can really cement our reputation as long-term shareholders and supporting companies. And that is why we enjoy such great access to management teams, because we support them for the long term. We support them through tough times. And these are the times when we really can cement that reputation. And getting out and seeing companies and speaking to founders about their corporate visions is a really good way of calibrating, you know, the what's actually going on rather than what Wall Street thinks is going on.
Finally, what is your advice as to how to become a successful investor?
I think you need to have relentless curiosity and open-mindedness. And, you know, the world constantly surprises us. And so you have to avoid being too confident about a particular thesis. You have to be open-minded and be prepared to change your mind. And again, I think that relates to trying to surround ourselves with people who don't work in the finance industry. You know, we can learn a lot from history. We can learn a lot from anthropology. We can learn a lot from science. So try and make sure you're always the dumbest person in the room, because you're surrounding yourselves with people who are smarter than you are and work outside the finance sector. So that distance from the noise is so important. Read a lot. Use Word more than Excel, by which I mean, you know, spend a lot of time focusing on the soft factors that can't be modeled, because actually they are probably going to be just as important in terms of determining future returns. Be satisfied with being roughly right over the next 10 years rather than over the next quarter. So, you know, this is not about out modeling everybody else to 3 decimal places. If you can be right on the left-hand side of the decimal place, you can make a lot of money for clients. And, you know, I think try and challenge industry conventions. Don't be scared of downside. Be curious, be patient, and be brave. And surround yourself with people who can help you to think in that way. And because our industry has this kind of gravitational pull towards convention, towards peer awareness, towards short-termism. So also make sure your incentives are structured on a 10-year view, not on a 1-year view.
Okay, Tim, thank you so much for doing this call with us.
I'm delighted to help. Thank you very much for the question.
はい、皆さんからですねいただきました、アンケートでですねインタビューが英語なのでちょっと簡単におさらいやってほしいというリクエストございましたので簡単にということなんですけども、皆さんグロース株に投資をされている投資家の方とても多いんだと思います。でこれまでのようにバリューが買われて、グロースが売られる相場が続くとするならばどうしたらいいかという質問に対して、彼の答えはやはりノイズから離れるということでありますね。で世の中にはその企業の株価が上がっていくために必要でないニュース、不要のニュースがたくさんあるということで、それに惑わされてはいけないということがありますと。でそれから彼ら長期投資やってますから結局何もしないっていうのは答えなんですね。グロース株が売られたとしても売らないと。でただこれ皆さん経験していらっしゃると思うんですけど非常に難しいわけですよ。ただ株価は戻ると。でこれ私も言ってますけどいい銘柄を持っていればですねっていう大前提があるわけです。で3年先5年先に、こうなってると思ってる銘柄が ファンダメンタルズは何も変わってないんだけれども、短期的にこう決算が悪いとか、そういう理由であれば株価が安いだけなんで、そこはむしろこう売る必要もないし、むしろ買います方がいいんではないかというわけなんですが、人間ってどうしてもこうすぐ行動したいと、こう怖いなと思ったらこう売りたいっていうこう誘惑がある。その誘惑に負けないということであります。で、成功する投資家になるためのアドバイスということで、お伺いしまして、画面出していただきたいんですけれども、絶え間ない好奇心とオープンマインドを持つと。金融業界で働いていない人たちと一緒にいることも大切ということで、これは決して私と一緒にいるといけないということではないですよ。彼は金融業界の人間ゆえに、自分の業界以外の人たちの話を聞くことが大切だということを言っております。あと歴史であるとか、その人類学であるとかですね、科学から学ぶということであります。で、自分がその部屋の中で一番賢くないことを確認すると。つまり自分よりも賢い人たちと一緒にこう時間を過ごせということでありますね。で、あと忍耐、勇気を持つ、そして特に今のようなマーケットではですね、勇気が必要だということなんだと思うんですけれども、よってその同調主義って言い方してました、および短期主義っていう言い方してました。それに負けないようにと、今これからもっと下がるって言ってる方も多いと思うんですけれども、よく自分で考えないでですね、周りがそう言ってるからといって行動してしまうと、ろくなことはないということです。1年とかじゃなくて、10年単位で少なくともそう5倍になるような銘柄を見つけて、強い信念のもとで投資をする。で、ということを彼言っておったということであります。はい、ティムさんのお話はいかがだったでしょうか。今回の内容というのは、マネックス証券で毎月行っているセミナーの内容の一部を抜き出したものとなっています。セミナー全体の動画もいくつかに分けてこのチャンネルで公開していますので、気になる方は説明欄よりご覧ください。7月19日に今後のマーケットにとってポジティブな展開が起きたこと、ウォーレン・バフェットさんがリーマンショックの時に言っていたこと、私たち投資家にとっても役立つお話です。そして今更聞けないコカ・コーラ株の投資の話をしてみたいと思います。説明欄にリンク貼っておりますので、ぜひ視聴してみてください。またマネックスオンデマンドでは、皆さんが今後の米国株投資で幸運をつかめるような情報を動画として今後もアップしていきたいと思っています。ぜひ見逃さないようにチャンネル登録はよろしくお願いします。ではご視聴ありがとうございました。ではまた。